Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the last Seed Talk episode of 2024. With the new year just around the corner, it's a great time to not only enjoy the present, but to reflect on the past and look forward to the future. So, with that in mind, we're going to be listening into an excerpt from episode 6, where I interviewed Lisa about how seeds changed her life as a gardener and a flower farmer. In this excerpt, we talk about why Lisa ultimately decided to focus on growing annuals, how her seed starting operation at the farm has evolved over the years, seeds she struggled with, the most significant crops for her farm, and more. Enjoy! So, which crops did you think you were going to be focusing on when you started farming, and why did you ultimately decide to focus on annuals? So I wanted to ask this question because I think a lot of people wanting to go into farming, they're imagining growing tulips and anemones and lilies and dahlias. And I'm just curious what you thought you were going to be growing, and then how you ultimately ended up with the majority being annual crops grown from seed.
Sure, and that's just such a great question. So, as I mentioned, when I really started to dive into flower farming, it was like August. And I had read Lynn's book, The Flower Farmer, and I was pumped. I was ready to do something to get started. And I didn't really have a lot of experience. And her book didn't really, the information I had didn't really talk about those bulb crops at this point, but it did talk about a few hardy annuals. And they would have been sweet peas, sweet William, and snapdragons, and rudbeckias. Those were the four first plants that I started from seed and planted in my garden. And I was literally just like that seed starting thing with Elliot. It's like once you get the right information from the right person, I was an overnight success. I planted them in the fall, and all winter I was looking at those plants thinking for sure they were not going to survive winter. But they did survive winter. And I definitely, as I then, next spring, I took my flowers to the florist, and one thing led to another. Probably after that first year, I started going down that rabbit hole that so many of us do, was like, oh, wow. Do you grow tulips? Do you grow lilies? Do you grow this, that, or the other? We'll buy them. And I then started experimenting with a lot of different bulbs. We could go down a real rabbit hole here, which I won't. For about 4 or 5 years, went really high in a lot of, lily growing in crates. And there's definitely a market. They're definitely gorgeous, but they are definitely a high investment, what I call a high investment, high risk, meaning if you're not really set up to do it, there's a lot of ways to lose a good portion of that crop. And after I did that for a few years, I just realized that I never had enough of the annual crops that were so much simpler, which were low investment. Like microscopic investment compared to the bulb crops. And I never had enough to go around. So I literally just kind of stopped growing and growing more annuals. And that started me down more annual variety, cool season, warm season, tying it all together. And literally that's what I built my business on now, is that there are cool season and warm season, and the combination of the two can give you a really long growing season. And we might add in here that I don't have any hooper greenhouses. So I grow everything outdoors in a giant garden, basically, same thing home gardeners do, just on a much larger scale. And I just found that it was simpler, it was less stress, and it just fit my conditions so well that I just ran with it.
Yep. And what percentage of your total sales would you say came from annual crops that you had grown from seed, if you had to estimate?
Well, so if I would compare that to our last few years in production, 97 to 98%, because literally the only perennials that we had we have a fairly large bed of peonies, which are obviously a perennial, but tuberoses, we don't have to dig tuberoses here where I am, so they behave as a perennial. So really tuberoses and perennial and peonies are the only two permanent crops that we have ever sold for the last decade. But they're a very small, they are a very small portion of what our business was.
Yes. Okay. So, how did seed starting in your business evolve over the years? And I'm kind of curious how the methods might have evolved, your setup, how many seeds you were starting, and who was starting them. What did your seed starting operation look like at the beginning versus at the end?
Sure. So to set the stage, I live in a bungalow. It's like 1,100 square feet. And soil blocking played an enormous role in allowing me to pursue becoming a commercial grower because it was just very conducive to what I had. I didn't have any special space. I didn't have this work building that I'm currently sitting in where, that's the home base for everything now. So I literally started out in my kitchen on my kitchen bar, and I have a pantry, and there was a shelf in there that I put a grow light on, and we have a cellar. And when I say it's a cellar, it is a cellar. It is not like a basement. It is concrete. I call it the dungeon. It's just not a place you want to go spend a lot of time, right? But I was so desperate for space, I started looking into it. So I began on my bar in my kitchen in that pantry. And then as it evolved, so that was in 1997 when I first started my first seeds. Within 2002 is when this building was built because my business, I was so well embraced. I could instantly scale, grow my business if I could just start more seeds, right? So that's when I moved into the cellar. We put grow lights down there, and I was just growing a lot of seeds at this point in time. And it was all 100% soil blocking at that time. And then once I got this building, we created a designated grow room in the building. It's a 10 by 10 room. The room, even though the room does have windows, the plants are grown based on the grow lights that are in there. And so it has some rolling racks with multiple shelves and grow lights on them. And also in that room is my table that has a seedling heat mat. And then I also have a germination chamber. A germination chamber is like the grown-up version of a heat mat. When growers start growing so many seedlings, you can't possibly have enough heat mat. And so I also have a germination chamber. We do also use some plug trays when it's appropriate and the best fit for that seed and the volume that we need. But yeah, it's evolved. And so probably about 8 or 10 years in to starting the business, I realized that the seed starting portion of my business was key. If we didn't start them, we couldn't plant them. If we didn't plant them, we couldn't sell them. And what happens as you start flower farming, I just love watching people evolve through these stages in flower farming school, right? At first, you were paying so much attention to all these little minute details, and it's like, friend, when you start selling and you have to harvest and sell and deliver and keep weed free and plant, and when you have when you're juggling 28 balls instead of one ball in the beginning, things get crazy. So about 8 or 10 years in, I can't quite remember, I hired my niece Kelly, she runs a big part of our business now. She was a new stay-at-home mom, and she wanted to work. She knew nothing about, she's still not a gardener really today. She said, I'll do whatever you want me to do. Just, let me come to work one day a week. And so her job instantly became, she was the seed starter. That's all she did. She didn't come to work thinking, oh, we have to harvest first, then we'll seed start, or we have to do this or that. That was her primary job. And that was an enormous corner that we turned in our business. Sorry, long answer to a short question.
No, that was great. So soil blocking played a really important role. Having a designated seed starter at some point played a really important role.
Yep.
That was very interesting to hear. Okay. So what is the most important skill for seed starters to develop? And this can be anything you want it to be. It can be a technique, or it could be a general attitude. What do you think is the most important thing for seed starters to learn?
To get the facts. before you start. I mean, does the seed get covered with soil or not? Does what temperature, I mean, does it germinate best at? How long does it take to germinate? Because I would be willing to say, Layne, so many of the questions that you're now getting that I used to field all the time by myself, it was basic information that oftentimes was written right on the seed package. But we get familiar. I mean, literally, friends, and this is so true. When I'm planting cool flowers in the fall, I take the book out to the garden with me when I'm direct sowing. Does it get
Yeah.
covered? I mean, my mind, it's like, what a major fail I could create. Like, for instance, Buplurum, which is a huge crop for us. Um, if I covered it and it wasn't supposed to be covered it, or vice versa. So I don't rely on your memory. Don't do it from memory. Get the facts. Create your own little database, flashcards, whatever you want. But don't, because almost always Bobo and I say, Bobo will say, oh man, Bobo is the seed starter now and has been for the last few years. She'll say, we had crummy germination on X. And I said, well, it's probably temperature. I mean, it's cool flower and it's still hot outside. Just start it again. And she'll like, you know what? You're right. I put it straight on the heat mat and it should have been up on a cookie cooling rack. So it's like our own fumblings really lead us to failures most often. So get the facts, even when you think you know them, for sure.
Yes. All right. Can you tell us about a seed that you struggled with in the past and have since figured out? So we all know not every attempt is going to be a success, especially at first when you're a new seed starter. So can you think of any seeds? Does anything come to mind that was a real struggle that you eventually learned how to grow?
Sure, for sure. And Ami Magus, which is a cool flower, it's like the Queen Anne's lace lookalike for anyone that's not familiar. Ami Magus was one that I just had mixed results for several years. You'd get just enough to torture you to germinate. I have a rule: if it's 50% or less, we ditch that tray and do it over again because it's very torturous. And they would always be right on the line. And then one day, instead of ditching that tray, I was busy. And I mean, when you're in, we call it the seed starting freight train around here. Once we starting seeds, there's seeds in the germination chamber, there's seeds on the heat mat. They have to go to the grow light and you have to bump the stuff out of the grow light onto the carport. I mean, it's like this constant vicious circle, right? Well, this one particular day, I snatched that Ami Magus. It was just puny. I thought, I am going to ditch your butt, but I can't do it right now. I'm just going to stick the tray over here. On the ground in the grow room, which would be on cool concrete. And I pushed it under the shelf and I just kind of forgot about it. And I mean, I literally forgot about it. And then when I took the trays off of the shelf that were like 3 inches above it, it revealed the Ami Magus tray. And guess what? 100% germination. Those boogers had just been too warm. So our standard practice now for Ami and Daucus is we sow them, we put them on the heat for about 24 hours. That just kind of alerts the seed that it's, time to break dormancy. And then we just put them on in a cooler area and they just pop like crazy. So yeah, we're still figuring it out. How many years later? 25.
It's just, yeah. It's funny how many times, I wonder how many inventions have happened just by accident, like discovering them, just like you mentioned. And also that's a good example of, it was something that you perceived as a failure at first, and then it ended up turning out to be a great success.
Exactly. Good
All
point.
Right. Next question. Okay. This is the question I gave to her ahead of time because I didn't think it was fair. Name 5 seeds you would not want to live without as a farmer. And I would also like to know which was the most significant crop for your farm.
And this was a really hard question to answer because I'll tell you that, I mean, what flowers do I love? I love the flowers that sell week after week after week. And that's what I found with annuals, that so often, I mean, I was looking for the staple flower that our commercial customers just could use every day of their business life, right? And so they, depending on the time of the year, it could change. But the five that jumped into my mind were Sweet William, Snapdragons, Zinnias, Celosia coxcomb, and of course, sunflowers. All five of those are just, and there's so many others that could go along with it. They are sales all the time. I mean, as I often say to people, I just grow. People say, well, what are the special flowers you grow? I just grow what I can grow really well. That's a great cut flower, and I could sell it every week, gone to all our customers, because growing the flowers is only a small part of a flower farming business. It's finding customers, serving customers, and selling to customers that finish the deal. And so it's kind of the whole package. So
And
the one I couldn't, what exactly was the question?
which one of those annual crops was the most significant for your
Well,
business?
I think it would be amiss to not say for sure sunflowers.
I knew it was coming.
Sunflowers, yeah, I mean, sunflowers, as I did for the first 10 years of my business, is the most underused, highly profitable, in demand when it's grown properly sunflower that there is. I mean, I can sell my sunflowers every week that we can have them. That's why we work so hard to see how early we can get them and how late we can have them, so that I can start that freight train of send me 10 bunches every week, people. That's what I want to hear from
Yeah.
our customers. Or for bouquet making, I mean, sunflowers paid for a $32,000 John Deere in 1 year. I mean, that's the reality. And what did the cost of growing those sunflowers? A fraction of that.
Well, I hope you enjoyed hearing about Lisa's journey with seeds. If you want to hear the rest of our conversation, feel free to check out the full episode, which was episode 6. This podcast is brought to you by the Gardener's Workshop, so if you have a need for any seeds, tools, supplies, or online courses, feel free to hop on over to thegardenersworkshop.com and check it out. Thanks so much for joining us. Please be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you're watching or listening, and we will see you in the new year. Until next time, happy growing!